After a beautiful tour of Primal Pastures out in Marietta, which is just an hour outside San Diego, we brought the farm to the Vivacious Dish Kitchen. So I have one of the Primal Pastures chickens here. Again, these are the same birds that we met, that we learned all about from farmer Paul Grieve. And now we're gonna turn this chicken into a grain-free pot pie. So an old favorite, I'm sure many of you have had this at some point in your lives, maybe at grandmother's house or in a country kitchen. This is a favorite dish of mine, and I think a really beautiful way to honor the life of this bird by creating a delicious, nourishing dish with it. So with that in mind, we just have the bird here. It's breast side down, and you'll notice with these birds, because they are coming off pasture, that they have a much more chicken-y flavor. So for any of you that have had maybe food in Europe or traveling other places, or maybe your grandmother's food from a while back, you might kind of notice a difference in flavor in eating pastured poultry. This to me is a great thing. It really tastes like the animal itself. Pastured poultry is also quite a bit smaller, with smaller breast size as compared to the dark meat. So it's gonna make for a really rich, nourishing flavor in the dish. It'll be delicious. So I just have a little sea salt. We're gonna sprinkle that over the top just to add a little bit of flavor here, and pepper. That's it. We're gonna keep it really light and simple. And then we're gonna bake this in the oven for about 45 minutes to 1 hour. You're gonna wanna keep an eye on the temperature, and you wanna get it up internally to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. Once you have it there, you'll know it's done. It'll have a nice crispy layer on the outside, and then we're gonna take that, shred it, and add it to the center of our pot pie recipe. While our chicken is roasting away in the oven, we're gonna get started on the crust for our pot pie. And for any of you who have maybe followed a grain-free or gluten-free or paleo-style approach, you know that making pastries specifically can be the most challenging part of eating in this way. And pastries in general are something that should be enjoyed, on occasion for special occasions, but it's certainly good to have options to make when you feel like it. So we're gonna use blanched almond flour to start our pie crust. This almond flour is coming from a farm in Northern California. This is organic, so really cleanly sourced. I find that using organic almonds is really important because almond production can be very pesticide heavy when not organic. So this flour is amazing, definitely a big fan, and it's blanched, so it's very fine, which makes for a really nice pie crust. So we have that, and then I'm using arrowroot flour. This is a bit starchy, so definitely not a low-calorie food, but like I said, for a special dish, it's fine to use on occasion. We have a ½ cup of that. That's gonna make our pie crust really light and flaky, which is what you would hope for when making a pie crust, whether grain-free or otherwise. We're just gonna combine those up like so. I'm gonna add a little bit of sea salt as well, just to help add some flavor to this, make it really yummy. So we're gonna combine those. And then I'm gonna be working with grass-fed butter today. It's grass-fed because since we're using pasture-raised animals, it's certainly important and helpful to have our butter be pastured as well, coming from a ruminant. So we have cubes of butter. This is about 6 tablespoons worth. And you wanna have your butter be as cold as possible. That's really important because it's gonna make our crust really flaky and light. So as butter starts to melt, it'll actually make the dough softer, which is not as flaky. So we're gonna use a pastry cutter now, and we're just gonna start to cut this butter into this flour mixture like so. The goal with this is to have your butter take the form of small pea-sized cubes. And sometimes as you start to go, it might get stuck on your pastry cutter. You can see there's a lot of butter, so you can just scrape that off. But you wanna be working with cold butter because as we add some pressure here, that does tend to warm it up a little bit. And ideally, like I said, you wanna keep this dough as cool as possible when working with it. So we'll keep doing that and get it to that nice crumb consistency, and then I'll show you how to finish the dough and roll it out for our pot pies. So now you can see that our crust is melted together. It has a nice crumb consistency. This is exactly what we want. Really light and airy, that's perfect. We're gonna add just enough water, 1 tablespoon at a time, to get this just starting to combine together. So you don't wanna add any more water than absolutely necessary, because what happens is that can make the dough too soft and kind of gooey. So that's about 3 tablespoons. That's typically a good starting point. And you can see as we go that it's starting to combine very softly. And there's a fine line here, so you really wanna use caution as this starts to come together to not overwater it. we are very close to having this be the exact right consistency that we're aiming for. In fact, we might be there. Let's see. Ideally also you don't want to overmix, so getting it just so it's starting to come together like so. This is actually perfect, just like this. So glad we didn't put any more water in it. Let's move this aside and now we're gonna roll it out. So when rolling your dough, you wanna make sure that you have a very well floured surface. I'm using that arrowroot starch or flour once again. If you don't have arrowroot, you can also use tapioca flour. Both are light and starchy. And you wanna get just a really good layer of that onto your parchment paper. This is gonna help it prevent from sticking. Now I'm gonna take half of my pastry dough, and you're just kind of gonna ball it together just enough so it starts to be combined, and you're gonna press it down ever so slightly, and then flour the top again. A lot of times when working with grain-free pie dough, people say to put parchment on top. I found for myself that I actually preferred not to have parchment on top and just to add a little bit more flour. It tends to kind of stick between the two layers of parchment, which can make for a really big mess when trying to get your dough pulled out. So as we roll, we're gonna get this to about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch thick, kind of depending on what your preferences are. And I'm gonna make 2 individual size pot pies today. So we're gonna actually measure the ramekin size to know exactly the shape that we want, but this is probably gonna be just about the right size. So then we're gonna use the rest of the pie dough and crumble it on top to make a nice light crispy crust to cover our pie. If it starts to lift up like that, no problem, just kind of press it back down and keep going. You can always add a little bit more flour to the top as needed. And we're getting a little bit stuck here, but I think this is just about the right thickness that we want. So you can see that's our ramekin. You wanna lay that and make sure that crust is gonna fit in there really well. It looks like it should. So now we're gonna take it, and this is the trickiest part of all, and not always perfect. So note that if your crust kind of starts to fall apart, no worries, you can always just come back and press it in as needed. But you're just gonna peel it off like so. And it's easy to kind of peel the parchment back like that. So there you go, perfect. We have about 1/2 and 1/2, that should work fine. So I'm gonna let this actually fall away, no problem. And then we're just gonna kind of lay this into the bottom of our ramekin. What's important is that you get a single layer in the bottom, but as you can see, it's not exactly perfectly pressed, and that's totally okay. We're gonna form it now with our hands to get that exact crust that we're desiring. But if you've worked with a grain-free pie crust before, you know that this is not so bad. And this crust I love working with. It's flaky every time. It's pretty easy to work with, all things considered, and it's very, very delicious. So I'm just gonna press this in here, and then I'll show you what you want it to look like when you are ready with the final product. So once you have your pie dough pressed into your ramekin, it'll look something like so. You can see that there's a little bit more around the tip of the edge, which is gonna be great. It's gonna add for a nice flaky crust. And people might be wondering, well, if it's such a pain to work with a grain-free dough, why do it? But I found for myself that in eating grains, they can definitely be inflammatory for my body. So I was feeling very tired, sluggish, and a bit swollen all the time. And then when I removed refined grains and sugars from my diet, I saw dramatic improvements in that space. So that's why I prefer to cook grain-free. But if that's not an issue for you, you can certainly make the same recipe, but using a standard pie crust as well. So now that we have these ready, I'll show you how to make our filling and get this all ready to go and in our oven. So we're ready to take our chicken out of the oven. Let's see this beautiful bird. Has a nice crispy layer on top. You can see it's looking great. So we're actually gonna take this and move it aside, and I'm gonna shred it up to get it ready for our pot pie. And then what's great about this dish too is we can use this same cast iron. There's actually a little bit of fat from the bird, and you can see that there's not a lot of fat. And this is very typical with any sort of pastured meat product, is they just are less fat because they're not being so sedentary in their life. They're moving around, being active. They're not building up that fat cap that you're gonna see in more CAFO type, so commercial agriculture type meat. So we'll let this shred. I'm gonna put it aside for now. And then in the meantime, we're gonna prep our mirepoix. So mirepoix is our traditional carrot, celery, and onion combo. This is a standard in many dishes. It brings a lot of flavor. It's a great balance point. You'll see it often in soups, and it's perfect in our pot pie as well. So let me grab a knife for me here. I've put it over here. All right, here we go. So we're gonna chop up our onion, celery and carrots and get those ready to finish off our chicken pot pie. Our mirepoix is ready to go with our multicolored carrots, onions, and celery. I'm gonna add some fresh thyme in here as well. We're cooking in our friend Lou's kitchen today. It's a really great space, as you can see, and very grateful to her for letting us borrow it for the shoot. And she has some fresh herbs growing out front, which is always fantastic if you can get fresh herbs. So just pulling off some of those as well. You can use thyme in here. Rosemary is really good. It's totally up to you how you want to flavor your pot pie. We're going to keep it really simple today to highlight that beautiful pastured poultry that we're featuring in it. I'm going to throw in some pepper and salt as well. Very traditional. And then I'm gonna move this to the stove and start getting this sauteed. There's enough fat in our cast iron from the chicken that we cooked that we can, maybe a little more parsley, that we can actually just use that. If you're low on fat, you could certainly always use butter as well, or ghee in here to kind of get these veggies start to caramelize and saute a bit. We want to cook them over medium heat for about 8 minutes until they start to soften on the stove. All right, that looks good. And then in the meantime, I'm gonna peel some potatoes. We're gonna use the potatoes in the dish to actually thicken up our sauce to go inside our pot pie. So in a traditional recipe, you'd be using flour to thicken your sauce to make more like a gravy, but potatoes work as a fantastic alternative thickener. So we're gonna peel about a ½ pound of potatoes and boil them up in some salted water just until they're fork tender. And then we're gonna puree those boiled potatoes with a 1/3 cup of coconut milk to make a really awesome cream sauce base to go with all of our other ingredients that we're working on. Our mirepoix has been cooking on the stove for a few minutes now, so let's move into the next phase of this dish. I'm gonna add some chicken broth. This is actually chicken bone broth. This came from Primal Pastures as well. And one thing to mention is that once you get all of that beautiful meat off your chicken, save the carcass, save any of the remnants, and put it in a slow cooker, add some filtered water, and you can make this fantastic nutrient-dense bone broth, so you're actually being able to use the entire animal. You can use that broth to making soups, you can drink it in the morning. There's a recipe on vivaciousdish.com for it, and I highly encourage you to add that to your daily routine. So let's add some broth in here. We're just gonna get that so it starts to cook down really nice. Our veggies at this point are really soft, looking great. So we're basically making just a really great filling for this. We also have some organic green peas that we're gonna add. This is just gonna add some flavor to our pot pie, very traditional, we love that. Looking good. We're gonna let that sit just for a couple minutes and start to heat through. And then once that's heated through, you're gonna also add in your potato and coconut milk puree. So like I said, we just cooked those potatoes to fork tender. This is gonna be our thickening agent to make that really rich, creamy sauce that you would hope for in a pot pie. And what's awesome about this is it's grain-free, so it shouldn't be inflammatory for folks, and it gives you that cream sauce that you'd imagine. And you can see when looking at this that this is just starting to look absolutely fantastic. So we're gonna let that sit and cook for a few minutes more. We want it to thicken ever so slightly, just so we can keep that light, flaky pie crust going as we do this. And then we're gonna add in our chicken and let this cook, like I mentioned. So you can see our chicken has been shredded, it looks gorgeous. It definitely has a darker color than what you would imagine typically for a regular chicken or a standardly raised chicken. But pastured chicken, again, it's gonna be a darker meat, really beautiful, full of flavor, awesome in this dish. So let's just add that in the mix as well. Stir it up, and once it cooks down, we'll get our pies in the oven. So once your pot pie has gotten thick and beautiful, just like we like it, it's all heated through, looking gorgeous, we're just gonna scoop this filling into those pie crusts that we created before. Try to keep it off the edge as much as possible. That looks so tasty, I cannot wait to eat this. We made 2 little ones today. It probably is enough to fill about 4 small ramekins or 1 large pie crust filling. So I'm just demoing this, looking great. can see that chicken is just tucked away beautifully in there. And you want to get it up close to the top rim, like so. If you get any on the edge, you can just wipe it off. And then we're gonna add our pie crust topping. So let me actually bring this back over here and show you how to do it. So we have our gorgeous pot pies ready to roll. We have our crust that we rolled out. I refrigerated this to make it a bit easier to work with. And then we're just gonna take this and fold it like so. Get a couple pieces of it, and we're just gonna lay that right across the top of our pie. You might have to kind of stitch it together just ever so slightly, but it shouldn't be too tough at this point. It's nice when it's chilled, it's really easy to work with. Okay, looking beautiful. And just kind of pinch the edges. It's okay if there's a couple cracks, those actually work great as steam vents in your pie. So just seal it up. And then we're gonna put these in the oven at 350 degrees. You're gonna bake them for between 30 and 45 minutes. That's enough time to have that crust get nice and lightly brown around the edges. You don't wanna cook too long with a nut flour based crust because it can start to get burnt. So proceed with caution. I always recommend putting it in for 30 minutes, and then you can always put it in for a bit longer if you want your crust to be a bit more crisp. Okay, so let's get these country style beauties in the oven, and we'll check on them in about 30 minutes and get ready to taste them. Our pot pies are out of the oven, and my goodness, do they look delicious. I can't wait to dive in. But before I do, just wanted to thank Primal Pastures again for having us out on the farm and for raising poultry that makes for fantastically delicious, nourishing, healthy, and good for the environment foods like this grain-free pot pie we made today. So let's try it. It's so flaky. That crust is just exactly what you would hope for. And it's amazing, to me at least, having worked with grain-free ingredients, that it's grain-free. It's exciting. You can see just how flaky it is. It's still really hot, fresh out of the oven. And so tasty. Okay, one more bite, and let's sign out of the kitchen of Vivacious Dish.